So modern Goosebumps books have a certain reputation that comes with them. A lot of people have a lot of nostalgia, a lot of high standards, and a lot of great regard to the old school Goosebumps books that used to come out. For example, the OG62, a timeless classic of a kids' horror series. You have Series 2000, the evolution to OG62, a shorter, more concise series. It had more consistency. It leveled up in having more dark and more interesting concepts. It felt like a more fleshed out version of the OG62. And then, of course, after that, you had the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series. You had stuff like Triple Header. You had other things in there that made it very iconic for people. And of course, a lot of people grew up with the original Goosebumps TV show. Thanks to Dan Angel, Billy Brown, and other writers, we managed to experience a great kids anthology horror television, all a part of our classic childhood, which is why modern Goosebumps books have some problems with people, because modern Goosebumps is often associated with being formulaic, being repetitive, not hitting the mark, being past Stein's prime, and people have a very sort of standoffish reputation a lot of the time. You'll see that people kind of dog on moderns, they kind of give them a bad rep. They don't necessarily give them a fair chance all the time. And by reading quite a bit of moderns, there are definitely modern books that are quite, as Shakespearean to put, straight dog shit. Straight doggy doo-doo, straight rhinoceros scat territory. You know what I'm saying? Territorial scat all over the modern IP. But then you have these modern books that are quite great, really good in quality. And in fact, in some ways, they actually surpass some vintage sequels that people hold in high regard. Two books I can immediately think of, one book I haven't read yet, and coincidentally, they all come from Horrorland, the 2008 reboot series, the series that Stein did to basically help Scholastic revive the love for Goosebumps, bring back the IP from the dead. And now I'm going to be talking about one of the sequels from Goosebumps Horrorland in the first half that I think is a fantastic sequel. In fact, it did a great job. In fact, it proves that Stein can still continually improve his writing and surprise you with new things. And this book hits a lot of stuff that I enjoy. So without further ado, let's talk about my candidate for the best modern Goosebumps book that has released. This is Goosebumps Modern, that's Goosebumps Horrorland, all the way to House of Shivers. So it includes Hall of Horrors, Most Wanted, Slappy World, now House of Shivers. I think that Say Cheese and Die Screaming from Horrorland is a candidate for one of the best, if not the best, Goosebumps Modern book that I've read so far. This book has so many dark and disturbing moments in it. It has such crazy content in it that is horrifying, gruesome, disturbing, effective. All these things are stuff that you would only expect Stein and Scholastic could get away with back in the old days, during the 1990s when Goosebumps was popping. You could only expect this type of stuff to be written back then when there was less regulations, a lower standard on what kids were reading and experiencing. But the fact that this was managed to be created, in the 2000s and 2000, later on, that's crazy. The fact that a book like this was able to come out in the modern era. It is so disturbing, so dark. This book has some all right characters. I think the characters are okay. I think they do a good enough job. I think the main character is sympathetic enough and relatable enough that you can enjoy them. But man, she is going through a lot of shit in this book. There is a lot of stuff that this character is going through in the book that is heartbreaking, that's emotional, that's really deep when you think about it. And again, the imagery, the action, the things that happen in this book are genuinely scary. They will genuinely make your skin crawl. They will genuinely make you cringe imagining it. And they will make you shocked that this book managed to come out. And even Stein manages to fix some of the lore behind the Say Cheese and Die camera that's been a little bit wonky over the years. I actually like the way that he handles the story behind the Say Cheese and Die camera in this book and the way it's treated. I think it's all amazingly done. This book is fantastic, honestly speaking. So off the rip, I'm going to definitely recommend you. For my exact score, stay tuned to the end of the video. But let's talk about the plot synopsis and give you a general idea as to what this book is about if you've not read the Say Cheese and Die Screaming sequel. So Say Cheese and Die Screaming from Horrorland, you have a character, I believe her name is Julie or Julia. Could be wrong, but I think it's Julie. She is a kid who's a photographer. She loves photography. It's one of her main passions, and she's trying to get into this competition for the school, which is for pictures that are going to end up in the yearbook catalog. She wants to get the pictures, and she's speaking to her best friend, Renee. Renee is her best friend, and they're basically talking to each other about how Julia is so excited to be in this competition, to be basically a candidate for getting in the new what is it, yearbook, I was about to say New Year, the yearbook's catalog for pictures. However, there's a kid who's competition to her, and the kid's name is David. David is a very sort of, I guess, snobby, he's sort of like an uptight kind of kid. He's very overconfident. He's always sort of trying to dog on Julia, trying to get the better of her. And his dad is basically this camera shop owner. So he not only is very competitive, very confident, but he has access to great cameras. He has better cameras than a lot of other people. So he's always taking pictures. He's always trying to kind of shit on Renee and kind of overcome her in a lot of ways. And she does not like him. She thinks he's uptight. She thinks that, he's way too competitive and way too in her spotlight. And she really wants to win and get in the spotlight and get in the good graces of people. So she's trying to win. So what ends up happening is that after she finds out that the yearbook teacher is basically saying that, you know what, you and David can both compete, even though she was initially supposed to take this picture, this idea of taking the picture of all these kids for the yearbook being inside of the pool in the school, because there's a pool that's under construction in the school. There's no water in it. She thought she could take a giant picture of them in there and use it in the yearbook. And he decides, you know what, since David wants to compete, I'm going to let him and you compete against each other. And whoever takes the best pictures, whoever has the better portfolio, you can then end up being the one responsible to take this giant yearbook picture in this pool area. So she's a little bit disappointed that David somehow got roped into this. Now she wants to compete against him. And what ends up happening is one day when her and Renee are going down the street riding on their bikes, it's a little bit stormy outside, a little bit windy, a little bit eerie atmosphere. She ends up seeing this garage sale. And when she goes to this garage sale, she sees this camera up on this shelf in the garage. And she goes up to it. She thinks it's really interesting. It's a really antique, kind of collectible looking camera. It's got this big flash thing on it. And it looks really strange. It kind of looks like some type of weird, kind of like antique gimmick item. It doesn't really look like a normal camera. And of course, we as the viewers know that this potentially may or may not be the Say Cheese and Die camera. Which you find out, yes, it is. She goes up to it, and the garage sale owner lady freaks out. She goes, no, do not use that camera. Do not be associated with it. And she starts freaking out to put it away. So you assume that the owner, this, I guess motherly figure, knows about the dangers of this camera. She might just be keeping it there just to make sure it doesn't get in anyone's hands. But, since Julia ended up finding it, she warns her, do not use it. That thing is, dangerous. She doesn't give specifics, but it's a very sort of odd reaction that we know as the reader is related to the camera's powers, but Julia, the main character, doesn't understand why she's reacting like this. And then as they're going through the garage sale, just seeing different comic books and stuff, eventually the daughter of this potential owner shows up, and very stoic, very creepy, very eerie. She's not with much emotion, and she basically tells Julia, take the camera, go away before my mother sees you. And Julia's kind of shocked. She's like, why is this little girl giving it to me, even though against her mother's warnings? And again, this girl convinces her. She basically shoves the camera into her hands and pushes her away and forces Julia into a situation where she has to leave with the camera. So she basically kind of takes the camera, goes away because of this girl's odd action. And as she looks back and waves at the owner and waves back at the daughter is just staring with these very ominous, predatory eyes, just sort of looking cold-hearted at her. And she feels very uncomfortable as to why this daughter may have done this. And then as she brings back the camera, she's put into a situation. She has to go take pictures of the local basketball team at their school performing. It's a girls basketball team. And she decides, you know what, this might be my opportunity to take some pictures. And there are some bully characters who I think are like Greta and something. They're very mean to Julia, sort of insignificant side characters, just sort of bully characters. And they end up tripping her. And when she falls down, her initial camera lens breaks. And when she reaches into her backpack to get out her other camera that she had as a backup, she realizes that she left that camera at home, and instead she whips out the Say Cheese and Die camera. And this camera, she doesn't know any better. She ends up using it, and you get into some very disturbing moments. Now, she had a couple of moments even before this big basketball team. You have this encounter where when she first brings the camera home, she shows it off to Renee, and Renee realizes that this is the camera from the garage sale, and she's like, you took it, you stole it. She explains why, and then Julia explains why the daughter gave it to her. And when she ends up taking Renee's picture, Renee has a violent reaction to the picture. And it may or may not involve her eyes turning red and feel like they're burning and on fire. And Renee, her best friend, starts screaming out in pain, starts crying her eyes out, and she's brutally suffering from whatever this camera's done to her. They think she might have gotten blinded, had an allergic effect, because when they went up to their room and they pulled up the picture of the Polaroid, she started burning, and it's an incredible pain. I mean, they cannot, putting cold water in her eyes is not helping. Doing anything they can is not helping her, and she's really suffering. And it is a well-written scene of her best friend basically feeling like her eyes are being burned out of her face. It's horrifying, disturbing, and with me knowing how sensitive eyes are and me having a couple of scary moments, like sometimes your eyelash gets caught in your eye, and it's a very panicky, reactionary moment. I can only imagine how this is like. So this was the first moment that happened even before the basketball game. And then when she actually gets to the basketball game, she's still unknowing of the camera's effects. She ends up taking a picture. And when she takes a picture of the star player going up to the basketball court and she ends up dunking the ball, her arm gets caught in the basketball hoop. And the picture, the Polaroid that pulled out, showed none of her body, just her severed arm hanging in the basketball hoop. Now, this is not what happens because that's some Stephen King adult horror type of shit. You can't do that in a Goosebumps book. But basically, because she dunked and got her arm caught in the hoop and she's moving, momentously moving, her arm, this basketball player's arm, gets completely broken, shattered, bent up, and ripped in different places. And it's described that the bone is piercing through her skin and sticking out. It is very much similar to the Goosebumps 2023 first episode scene on the football field, if you remember that. I think this may or may not have been the inspiration behind that scene because it's very similar. Arm gets completely broken. There's bones sticking out, which is again like the scene from that episode. This was disturbing, dark, and again, you get this horrified screaming. The entire basketball, spectator audience is screaming their heads off. The other players are freaking out and crying. The coaches are freaking out and they're trying to get emergency help. And you just see Julia holding on to this Polaroid of this severed arm hanging in the basketball hoop. And then in real life, she's seeing this person's arm completely obliterated, horribly mangled. It's so disgusting. It's so disturbing. It's so dark. And just these first two scenes are so incredible that I was shocked that Stein was able to write something like that. As the story goes on, you find Julia trying to get rid of the camera, trying to find ways to solve her problems. She ends up more and more being haunted by it, getting into situations where this camera is causing more and more panic and trouble for her. You also potentially find out that the family that gave her the camera may or may not have done something that has caused and put her into a bad situation, potentially. And you even have this horrifying nightmare sequence. Now, this nightmare sequence is up there with one of the scariest dream sequences I've read in kids' horror. The only other one that rivals this horrifying nightmare sequence is Welcome to Dead House, which is my favorite book in the OG 62. This nightmare sequence in Welcome to Dead House dealt with the main girl, I think her name was Amanda, seeing her family as a bunch of rotting skeletons eating a bunch of decayed human bones for dinner with moldy flesh hanging off of them. Disgusting, insanely dark and disturbing. This dream sequence in this book may or may not deal with Julia taking this yearbook picture in this empty pool of all these kids watching her. And she describes that the camera starts throbbing. It starts throbbing, it starts pulsing and being warm like a live creature. And it's described that she continuously is forced to take shutter shot pictures of these kids. And slowly as these pictures start developing, the kids basically start becoming these skeletons, these dead skeletons, much like the original Seichis and Dai cover. They all become these dead skeletons in the pool, and the camera lens begins to bleed and starts dropping blood down beneath on her feet. Let me remind that to you. The camera is a pulsing, living object in her nightmare, taking pictures of all of these kids that it's slowly murdering and turning into decomposed skeletons, while the camera lens is continuously bleeding. The same way an eyeball bleeding is disturbing, this camera lens is treated as an eyeball, essentially dropping and leaking out blood. That is one of the best kids' horror nightmare sequences I have ever read. It is fantastically written, and it's so disturbing. She wakes up panting, screaming, in cold sweat, horrifying stuff. You even have this extra lore behind the camera. The lore that was initially in the first book is kind of rebooted, retconned into a different lore. The lore in this book may or may not deal with the cursed object in relation to a movie set. An object for a movie set that ended up becoming a source of bad luck, this terrifying omen, and it became the cursed object. If you've ever seen, I think the movie's called The Omen. Was it The Omen that had all those horrible coincidental experiences and tragic accidents happen that the movie set was considered cursed? I don't know if it was The Omen. I might be talking about a different movie. I saw it on Mr. Nightmare's, I think, top 5 horror movie set video thing. I think it might have been The Omen that had all that cursed stuff going on. This felt and reminded a lot like that, where it's, this potentially originates from this cursed movie set, and it has, different stuff going on. So that may or may not play a part into the role of the story. And yeah, man, that's all I want to give. I want you to experience the rest, see how it wraps up, see what the mystery is. Her trying to get rid of this camera is impossible. It keeps finding a way back to her. It keeps causing trouble, and the story slowly starts to reveal itself until you get to the climax, which seems like a resolution, and then, of course, the freaky twist. This is a great story. I'm going to give it a 9.3 out of 10, which means that this book is an A+ book. Actually, you know what? Let me retcon real quick. I'm actually going to give this book a 9.5. I'm going to give this book a 9.5 out of 10. This book is in my S tier for the best horror books that I've read, modern horror books that I've read. And I'm going to bump up another sequel book in Horrorland to a 9.5 as well that I'll discuss later. This book, I think, is as equal quality, if not close to the quality, of Say Cheese and Die. Say Cheese and Die's book is in my S tier. It's in my 9.5 and higher. I think I might have given it 9.5, 9.6. I think I'm going to give this book around the same score. I think this sequel is of similar, if not the same quality as the first Say Cheese and Die book. And I think in some regards, people are going to like this one more. And if you do, I'm not going to blame you. I love this book. I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. And I would definitely recommend you guys check it out. Please go read Say Cheese and Die Screaming, because this, for me, is my favorite modern Goosebumps horror book that I've read. This is hands down. Not just, I should say, I said horror, not just Goosebumps, but my favorite kids horror book. This might be one of my favorite modern kids horror books that I've read. All right, I want to read more of those. This is up there with one of my favorites. And I think it did a fantastic job. So you know what, Stein? You proved with this one that you still had what it takes. You still have that creativity within you, that good writing. And I think he absolutely nailed it. This is definitely the sequel that should have been, instead of Say Cheese and Shit Yourself Again. That was in OG62. So good job to Goosebumps Horrorland. The man was writing his ass off. You got that pen straight on fire, straight arsonist pen, dropping heat. This book is great. 9.5 out of 10 in my S tier. And potentially the best Goosebumps. This might be the best Goosebumps sequel. I don't know. We'll have to debate on that, but this might be one of the best Goosebumps sequels out there. That's all I have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. That was my video on why Say Cheese and Die Screaming is the best Goosebumps modern book to me. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hit that subscribe button down below. Hit that like button. It's free way to support me. We're close to 250 subscribers. So if you guys can help me hit that milestone, that'd be amazing. And of course, I have a Q&A video that I'll be recording later when I have time, which is to celebrate the 200 subscriber celebration that we passed a couple weeks ago. And yeah, let me know your thoughts about Say Cheese and Die Screaming. Do you feel the same way I do? Do you feel a little bit differently? And what are some of your favorite Goosebumps modern books and favorite Goosebumps sequels? Let me know down below. That's all I have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and deuces. Yo, man, there's a lot of freaky eye horror in here, man. You got the whole eyes burning horror. You got the eyes bleeding horror. I swear to God, man, there's no bigger panic than when an eyelash gets inside your eyeball. You think that you're about to lose everything. And yet, if I did manage to lose my eyesight, at least I wouldn't have to see people putting Night of the Living Dummy 3 in S tier.